If you're reading through Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians today, you'd be reading chapter 4, which has 18 verses. It's an exhortation at first to purity, to godliness, which is part of the entire letter. And then in verse 13, Paul starts to address the question concerning the coming of the Lord. And, well, what about the people who die before the Lord has returned? Because in the first decades of the Christian movement, there was a clearly strong feeling that Jesus had ascended and he might return at any moment, which created a great sense of urgency in terms of personal holiness, being ready and prepared, and an urgency to witnessing and evangelism, because we wanted as many people as possible, the early church did, to hear about Jesus and to be able to respond to him before he returned. But as the years and even decades began to advance and Christ hadn't returned, some of the earliest believers began to die. And the question arose, well, what's going to happen to those people who died before Jesus returns? And that's what Paul is addressing beginning in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13. And it's very pertinent for us because obviously we are still living in this interim period between Christ's ascension and his second coming or his return. And Paul writes in verse 13, "But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about those who have died, so that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope." There is not a month that goes by that we don't have people in our church who either pass away, members of our church, or have people in our church who lose family members or friends. And one of the fundamental differences for those of us who are Christians is that we believe that those of us who have placed our trust in Christ, that death is not the end of everything. And that's what Paul tries to assure the Thessalonians. He goes on to say, beginning in verse 14, "For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have died." So there's a sense in which, while we suffer the very real and painful loss of our loved ones, we lose their physical presence. We lose that person who we have lived with, known, hugged, talked with, shared meals with, and shared life with. And that is a real and significant loss that we have to learn to adjust to and cope with and live with. But we don't grieve as those do who think death is the end of everything. We believe that we will see one another again. And that takes some of the edge of the sharpness of grief away, because we know we have to cope for a while, but not forever. And one day we will be reunited with the Lord and with those we love who have gone before us in the faith. And that's why we don't grieve as those who have no hope. If you are grieving the recent loss of a loved one right now, I pray that God will comfort you, that the Lord's presence will be real to you as you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and that the promises of faith may give you hope.